In this video, I'm going to show you how to take the two-dimensional design that we went over in part 1 and transfer that into a three-dimensional form that we're going to use to spin the actual object. We begin the 3D design stage by selecting a block of wood. Be sure to note the dimensions of this wood, height, width, and depth, because you'll be using this block to create both halves of the vessel in this case. Sometimes I use two chucks with different shapes, but for this vessel, I will be using only one. The type of wood you use for these chucks is also important. You will need a dense wood because the chucks will come under a lot of pressure and friction in the spinning stage, which will be in part 3. I use a fairly common hardwood like maple to create my chucks. Draw a circle on the surface of the wood. The circle needs to be just a little bit larger than what the chuck will be, because as I turn it on the lathe, it'll get a little bit smaller. I use a bandsaw to then cut out a stout cylinder. Once I have the wood cut to shape, the next step is drilling a hole into the wood and then tapping the threads to match that of the lathe. The chuck will then be able to screw onto the end of the headstock of the lathing machine. When we begin lathing the wood, we use the cardstock template we made in part 1 to gauge the shape of the chuck. The tools I use to carve out the design are called wood turning tools. Be sure to adhere to all safety precautions before beginning this step by putting on eye protection and a dust mask. I use the sharp end of the wood turning tool to carve the spinning wood while it's on the lathing machine. The alterations I make to the wood will apply to the chuck all the way around. Keep using the template you made as a guide to how you want the chuck to look when you're finished. Once I'm finished with the wood turning tools, I used sandpaper to smooth out the surface of the chuck while it's still on the lathe. Now that the chuck is done, we can begin making the discs for spinning. Use an 18-gauge copper sheet and table shear to cut two 5" by 5" square plates. Use a marker to draw lines connecting the four corners of your 5" squares. Then use a center punch tool on both plates to mark the intersecting point where these lines meet. We'll use this point to focus a compass on and then draw a 5" diameter circle. Using a bench shear machine, carefully cut around the circle you've made. What you have left are two discs that should be even with one another. We're going to need to heat these discs up to a dull red color. This is called annealing, and it softens the metal. Once these are finished annealing, we put them in a vat known as pickle. The pickle is merely a crock pot that is full of a sodium bisulfate acid solution. This will clean the blackened surfaces of the discs and get them ready for part 3, where we will spin these discs into the shape of the vessel.